Okay, the first thing we're going to do is get our background fabric ready. In the instructions, she tells us the size to cut our background fabric, and we're going to be making the 24 by 24 approximately table topper or mini, or it could even be a wall hanging if you want it to be. So I've got my piece of background fabric here, and I've chosen like a black tonal. You can see it kind of has a little tonal print. So I'm going to fold it in half. I've already got it cut. I'm going to fold it in half, and then I'm going to fold it in half again, and I'm going to find this center section on the fabric. And since my fabric is black, I'm just going to take a soap sliver and I'm going to mark the center of the fabric. And this will help us know where to center our Dresden when we're finished. So let me just make this mark a little better. So you can see I have marked the center of my fabric with an X. And so now I'm just going to fold up this fabric and set it aside. And we will be using that at the very end, but we want to make sure we have it ready to go. Next, we're going to talk about cutting our Dresden blades. And let me position this so you can see my fabric I've chosen. Here's my fabric that I'm going to be using for my blades. And the blades are the ones that are shaped like blades that we're going to cut out of this fabric. And to cut your blades, she has us cut our fabric into a 10-inch piece, like so. Okay, and we're going to need to cut 12 blades for the purposes of this project. So one thing I'm going to do here, this ruler is very slick on both sides, this Dresden template. And I learned this in another class not too long ago, that you can take Scotch tape loops and put on the back of your template, and that will help to reduce the sliding around of it on the fabric. So I'm just going to put some Scotch tape loops on here, like so, at the big enough spots. And you may have to replace them depending on how many blades you're cutting, but it sure does help keep your blades from slipping. So I'm going to turn the blade over and I'm going to lay it on my fabric. I want to avoid the selvage. See, the selvage is right here. I just laid my blade just to this side of the selvage, and I've got it down there firmly. So, and I'm just going to cut 2 at a time. She says in the directions that you can lay 2 widths of fabric pieces on top of each other, but I'm just comfortable cutting 2 layers at a time. So I'm going to put my rotary cutter on here, and I'm going to cut, and then I'm going to turn this one around. Notice how the template stays on there because of the tape. And I'm going to cut again. And there's my first pair of blades. So I'm going to carefully peel this off, and I'm going to lay it back on here again. I've rotated the tool. If you notice, it was like this. I've rotated the tool, and I'm going to lay it on top right here like so. And that tape is still working for me. And I'm going to give it another cut. I'm going to remove my fabric, and I'm going to turn it again and line it up. See, it's not quite lined up. But you kind of get the idea now. We're cutting our blades. That's better. So go ahead and use this technique to cut your blades. If you have the tape, it does really help. Notice how that sticks on there so nicely. So I've got 6 of my 12 blades cut, and I'm going to continue cutting. But go ahead and cut your Dresden blades, and then when we come back, we will do some more cutting to prepare what's going to go in the windows, which is kind of exciting too. So be right back. Cut your blades. All right, I've got all my blades cut. I was able to get 9 blades out of each width of fabric, so I'm sure that's probably going to vary according to which fabric you're using and such, but it's nice to know that you can get 9 out of one width of fabric. So I've got one of my blades here, and I've got a My blade color is kind of dark, and I don't really think that a heat erasable pen is going to show up very well on that. So I've got my blade laying here, one of my blades, I've turned it over, and I'm going to put the template on top of the blade. So now it's time to determine, first of all, we have to decide how many windows do you want in your blade. Okay, the blade's got 2 openings for windows, and for the purposes of the class today, I am going to be putting 2 windows in my blade. So I've got this opening here and this opening down here. So the first thing we need to do for each of our blades, we need to mark the openings for the windows. So I've got the template on top, and I'm going to trace around it with my heat erasable pen, like so. And I'm going to trace around this lower one too, since I'm going to have 2 windows in my blade. Okay, just like that. And now I'm going to pull this off. Now when we start handling these blades, and they're going to be handled a lot because we're going to be cutting and tracing and cutting again and everything. So we want to make sure we handle them gently, because these are bias edges and they can stretch, and we don't want to stretch our bias edges. The more stretched they get, the more likely that you're going to have some stretching on your Dresden, and it may not lay flat. So we want to be really careful about that. So now we've got our windows drawn. Can you see? Let me hold this up to the camera so you can see. The windows lines are drawn on there. You can kind of see it, but you see it better in person. So I've got my window lines drawn on there. And next what we need to do is we need to draw a line around the inside of each window so that we have a little bit of a seam allowance. Now on the ruler, if you look at the ruler, she's got a 1/4 inch line along the edge here, and you can use that to trace along the line of your windows. So I'm taking my pen again, and I'm going to trace that on there like that. Okay. Now I have a little trouble seeing that line, so I'm going to use a smaller ruler that I have. This is just a 2.5 by 6 inch ruler. And I'm going to use a smaller ruler because I can see that a little bit better. But it's your choice. If you've got good eyes, then you can use the ruler. But around each window, you need to trace that 1/4 inch seam allowance, just like I'm doing here. And it takes a little time. I mean, you may just want to sit down at your desk or something and make yourself comfortable, and don't rush through this. This is a precise type of project, and we want to make sure that we are being precise about this, because we want it to come out and look really even and artistic. So I'm tracing around, and even trace this little one here. This is kind of tricky down here, this one on the bottom, but you got to trace them all. So you can see where I've traced the window designs into the fabric. And so you need to do that tracing for each of your 12 blades. Okay. And then the next step will be when we start cutting them out. Okay. So go ahead and trace, and then we'll start talking about filling in the windows. All right, now that we've traced around the inside, or we've determined where our picture window is going to go in our Dresden blades, it's time now to cut out the inside of the blade. So I'm going to take these super sharp scissors, and here's my blade with the window marked in it, and I'm going to just make a slit right here in the center of the window. And I'm going to go in, and I'm going to just clip around, trimming on the inside line, on that seam allowance line that we drew on there. So I'm going to just go around very carefully with these super precise scissors, and I'm going to hit it right in the corner, just like that. And I'm going to go around and cut out the windows in all of my blades. And this is going to take a little time, so you need just to sit down and relax cut out the windows. And let's do the same thing on this lower window. We're going to make a little snip right here. And then I'm going to go in and cut to the corner. And I'm still just cutting inside the inside lines. I'm cutting right on that inside line. I'm cutting the inside out. I'm going to cut across here just a tiny snip. And then right up here, up the side. And across the top, like so. Okay. All right, so now I've got my 2 holes cut in. Can you see that? Where these are my window fillers. I'm gonna put those in the scrap bin. And so here's what it's gonna look like. Here's what my blade is gonna look like. So now I'm going to look here and see where these 2 lines crossed, and I'm gonna just cut straight back to the point. Straight back to the point. Back to the point. To the point. To the point. So I've cut these little slits in around the edge back to the point. And I'm going to do the same thing on this little one. First time I did this, I looked at this bottom one and I thought, well, how on earth am I going to cut that? That's so tiny. But you just cut to the point, and then that's going to provide that lower edge. Okay, so go ahead and cut your Dresden windows out. Cut the windows out and cut your points. And then when we come back, we're going to get out our glue and start preparing the edges for the window filling. Okay, now I've got all my windows cut out of my blades, and we're ready to start preparing the window for the window filler that we're going to do in the next step. So one blade at a time, I'm going to lay them face down on a piece of freezer paper. Let me move my camera here so you can see what I'm doing. And this is just freezer paper, and I've got the glossy side up because you are going to be putting glue on here, and that you don't want them getting stuck and having to pull on them, because these are very fragile now that you've cut these holes in them. So you want them to be as stable as possible. So just when you do it, if you just lay each one down on a piece of freezer paper, it'll keep it from freezing. It'll keep it from sticking. So I've got my glue here, and this is the Roxanne's Glue Based It thing, and I checked to make sure the tip wasn't clogged, because anybody who's ever had this kind of glue knows that that happens from time to time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the edge that's closest to me. You can see I've got all my corners cut so I can peel these edges back, and I'm going to just take my glue and I'm just going to dot it on here like this. Now everybody's got different comfort levels with different kinds of glue, and this is my comfort level. So I've got the glue on that first edge of the blade, and I'm going to use this little, whatever this is, this little turner thing to help me fold it back. And you can use a cap of a pen or the edge of your seam ripper or whatever, but we're going to fold it back right along that line that we marked. And you just tap, 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 you know, to make sure you get a good seal there. And then I'm going to turn my freezer paper, and I'm going to do the next one. Just tap the glue on there, and then use your little turner thing to help flip it back. And you just kind of tap, tap, tap with your fingers. And you don't want any raw exposed edges, because we're going to, when we put the window filler in, we're going to top stitch around this. And so you want to make sure that you get it sealed off pretty good with no raw edges. So let's tap, tap, tap. I'm going to do this first one, and then I'll show you. And then I'm not going to make you suffer through watching me do all these. But we're going to tap it back, fold it back gently, and tap, 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 tap. Here's the next one. Tap, tap, tap. And fold it back gently. Okay, and here's the last one on the upper window. I want to show you the lower window too, if you're doing a lower window, because that bottom part can get a little bit tricky. So we want to make sure that you get comfortable with that. Tap, tap, tap. So there's my upper window. So let's do the lower one, and then I'll move on to something else. Let's do this side one. Stuck to my finger a little bit. Tap, tap, tap. And this bottom one is tricky. If you notice, I told you how narrow it is, and I trimmed, let me hold it up to the camera so you can see better. I trimmed so there's like a little point there on that bottom one. Can you see that little point? I trimmed so there's a little point there, and that's going to give us a flat surface on the bottom. Let me show you. A little bit of glue on that one. Flip it back. Tap and glue and tap and glue. And put on a Lifetime movie or some reality TV, maybe some 90 Day Fiance while you're doing this, because you can just kind of sit and do it while you're doing, just sitting and relaxing, thinking about the meaning of life, gluing our Dresden blades. Okay, so I've got this one glued, and I'm going to be very careful when I lift it up off the freezer paper because it is all biased. But you can see there's my window, my first window. So the next thing you want to do, after you do a few of them, you'll get better at it the more you do. You want to take it over to your iron and just give it a quick press with a hot iron. So I've got my little iron set up over here. So let me walk over there really quick and press it. And the pressing just kind of helps to dry the glue and set it. But don't grind into it, just kind of press. Okay, don't go back and forth like you're cleaning off your kitchen counter. You just want to kind of gently press it to make sure that the glue dries. So this is what we end up with. Okay, so go ahead and get your edges all glued down. It'll take a little time, but you'll get quicker at it the more that you do. And then when we come back, we're going to cut our pieces for the filler of the window. And so that'll be next. So there was a lot of prep work involved with this, but trust me, the big wow factor that you're going to get when it's done is going to be well worth it. Okay, so go ahead, get your edges glued down, and we'll move on to the next step. Thank you. Okay, so next it's time to cut our fabric that we're going to be putting into our windows. And so I'm just going to give you a little preview of what mine are going to look like. Let's see here. Here's one of my blades, and I've chosen this fabric to put inside my window. So it's going to be rather striking. So we need to cut the pieces out that fit into the window. So we're going to use the 10-inch blade again, just like we had before. And I'm going to draw again. Once again, I'm going to be drawing on the wrong side of my fabric because it is lighter. Now, one thing we need to keep in mind when we're drawing on the wrong side of the fabric is we need to make sure that we allow a quarter inch around the design this time. Last time we drew a quarter inch on the inside. This time we're going to draw a quarter inch on the outside. So keep that in mind when you're making your fabric cuts. Now, those of you who are fussy cutting, say that you're going to cut so that you have a basket of flowers inside or a Christmas motif, you're going to have to position your ruler on the right side of the fabric and move it around to get it just right to where that piece is centered. When I first saw this technique at the show in Houston, oh, there were so many beautiful ways that she used this tool. She had one that she had made for a child where she put colors, a different color in every blade, and then down here she put numbers. So like for a baby quilt to help them learn their colors or their numbers. I mean, there was one she did where she made it into a clock since there were 12 blades, and then she had a number on each blade. So there's a million different ways you can use this tool. But for the purposes of the class, I'm just going to use this as my filler fabric. So I've got my fabric laying down here, and I'm going to trace around just like I did before. Okay, and I'm going to trace around this lower one too. All right, kind of a sloppy job on that one. Make sure I've got these lines all drawn right. And so now I want to add a 1/4 inch on the outside. So here's the line on the ruler. I'll use that just for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to draw a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch. Don't we love these erasable markers, huh? 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch. You kind of get the idea. And then when I cut this section out, I'm going to be cutting on this outer line. And I'm going to do the same for my smaller insert right here. Cut, cut. It'd be fun to do this with Christmas fabric and have different Christmas motifs in the blade. I think that would be really pretty for a table topper. Okay, so now I've traced around. This is enough for one blade, and I'm just going to cut on this outer line, and then when we come back we will insert this into the window. So go ahead and cut out your shapes, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so now I cut out my shapes, and remember I traced around the opening on the ruler, and then I drew a 1/4 inch line on the outside, and I cut around the outside line is what I did. So now it's time for the magic to start. I've got my freezer paper back down again, and I'm going to put my Dresden blade face down on the freezer paper, and I'm going to take my handy dandy glue bottle, and we'll start with this small one first. And I'm just going to put dots of glue around the edge, just like we did before. Just on top of the part. I'll hold this up to the camera so you can see it. So I just put drops of glue right around that edge, like that. And I'm going to lay my piece that I cut, my corresponding piece, face down on top of those glue dots. And I'm just going to finger press it with my fingers. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this bigger opening. I'm going to put my dots of glue all the way around. Just little dots, not too much. We don't want to go overboard on the glue. We just want to hold it into place until we can sew it down. Here are my glue dots. Again, you can see the glue dots. And now I'm going to take a bigger piece, and I'm going to put it face down on top of the glue dots. So you just kind of want to center it over that hole, and it covers everything up pretty good. And I'm going to just press that with my fingers, just like so. And here is my first Dresden window, my first blade. Okay, so you need to do this for all of your blades. And like we did before, you'll want to take it over and give it a little press with the iron to make sure, to help the glue to dry faster and to make sure it's all stuck together well. But go ahead and do that for all 12 of your blades. and the next we'll start the assembly process.